Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Introduction to Urban Planning. In today's session, we will look at another example of special purpose plan through City HRIDAY plan CHP under the larger ambit of types and levels of plan. Accordingly, the coverage of the lecture will include introduction to HRIDAY scheme, and we'll look at what is the need for the scheme. We will look at the overview of the scheme, the strategies and its objectives. We will outline the procedure which was followed for management of the project and its implementation. Thereafter, we will look at particular case study from Amritsar to understand the how it was aligned with the mission and how it translates the special purpose which was intended through it. So, accordingly, the coverage would include the following. According to these coverage, the learning outcomes that are expected from you are that after completion of this section, you should be able to discuss the purpose and need of the scheme. You should be able to list out the key objectives involved in the scheme. You should be able to identify, critically review the procedure for project preparation and implementation of the mission. Then you should be able to support your conceptual understanding with the help of the case study. Here we are going to look at Amrit City case study. Now, let us look at the National Heritage City Development and Augmentation Yojana, abbreviated as HRIDAY, scheme by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. HRIDAY was a central sector scheme of the Government of India undertaken by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. The scheme was launched on 21st January 2015 with the aim of bringing together urban planning, economic growth and heritage conservation in an inclusive manner, and with the objective of preserving the heritage character of the city. Under the scheme, 12 cities were identified for development. The mission period of HRIDAY scheme ended on 31st March 2019. Through the scheme, support was extended for the development of core heritage linked civic infrastructure projects. The intervention focused on revitalization of urban infrastructure for areas around heritage, religious, cultural and tourism assets of the cities. These initiatives included development of water supply, sanitation, drainage, waste management, roads, footpaths, street lights, tourist convenience, electricity wiring, landscaping and such citizen services. We see that through the scheme, strategic and planned development of the heritage cities was envisaged so that the overall quality of life is improved of the place, such as the sanitation level is improved, security is improved, overall tourism is improved, the experience what tourists have is improved, the heritage of the place is revitalized and the sources of livelihood are retained in the city's cultural identity. Now, let us look at from the government perspective why our heritage cities needed this scheme. The ministry reviewed that the past efforts of conserving historic and cultural resources in our cities and towns were carried out in isolation. The efforts were carried out in isolation without integrating the needs and aspiration of the local communities, Further, the prime urban development issues such as local economy and livelihood, how people are earning, urban planning like integration with the planning process, integrating at different levels of plans, what we are looking at. So, those were not happening. Service delivery like what level of services such as water supply, power supply, sanitation services, those integrations were not happening. Infrastructure such as road in the areas were not integrated. The ministry also acknowledged that the heritage development of a city is not just about the development and conservation of few monuments, but it is about development of entire city. The process and the aim of the heritage development should involve the planning. It should consider the city's basic services, should put in efforts to improve the quality of life for the people who live in there. The effort should be made to improve the economy and the livelihoods of the city and its people. Further, overall cleanliness of the places and security of the places should be attained. And importantly, the soul of the city and its main character embodied in the form, in the people and in the living culture should be explicitly maintained in the character of the city. So, ministry reviewed all these things, acknowledged and further came up with this scheme. Furthermore, the ministry also acknowledged that the conservation of the urban heritage was being often carried out without linking the city with the city urban planning process such as regional planning, master planning or the local area planning. Neither the conservation tools and the local economy or the services delivery aspects were linked in the process. The ministry witnessed that the heritage areas were neglected and overcrowded. As we can see in the image here, they observed that the heritage site had inadequate basic services and infrastructure. Even you must have experienced with your travel to many of heritage places or must have been living in these heritage cities, and you must have had experience of lack of water supply, issue of sanitation, issue of poor roads or linkages. You must have experienced problem with basic amenities like toilets, signages, street lights. Ministry took review of all these conditions. Therefore, in the HRIDAY scheme, strategies were developed that created provision for funding to undertake interventions. The scheme provided 100% funding from the central government. Strategies were formulated to facilitate the preparation of special purpose plan for these cities in form of City HRIDAY plan, which we call as CHP, and further develop projects and their detailed project report DPR while availing assistance under this scheme. So, this integrated the process with the planning process of special purpose plan and projects as we had seen in different types and levels of plans. Further, it provided institutional framework to execute work on ground. We see that major management unit was NIUA. It was designated as HRIDAY Project Management Unit for the scheme and functioned as a secretariat for the National Mission Directorate. Further, the City HRIDAY Plan, CHP, Special Purpose Plan were required to be prepared by HRIDAY City Anchors. HRIDAY City Anchors were assigned for each city and DPR were required to be developed by agencies selected by the cities from the empaneled list which was prepared by the center. So, here we see how the scheme linked it with the planning institutions and human resources required for the purpose. In this image, here we see the institutional structure designed for translating the purpose on ground. These institutions would look at the project appraisal and approval. We see that they would look into the appraisal of the project. It will be done by the HRIDAY City Anchor. Approval of the projects will be done by City Level Advisory and Monetary Committee. Likewise, appraisal and review will be done by National Mission Directorate and Technical Committee. Further, final review and approval would be done by HRIDAY National Empowered Committee. So, such a system was created. In the following image, we can see the list of heritage anchors which were involved in the process. So, we can see nearly 12 anchors which were here with the 12 cities identified. The strategy involved distribution of roles and responsibilities. We see that the ministry made provision for execution of work through Public Works Department, PWD, Special Purpose Vehicle SPVs. Then we see Central Public Sector Undertaking, CPSU, and state, parastate and the contractors of repute. Now, we look at the objectives of HRIDAY scheme. We see that the scheme focused on the planning, the development and the implementation of the heritage sensitive infrastructure. It targeted for providing service delivery and infrastructure in the historic city, particularly in the core areas. We see that through the scheme, the purpose was to preserve and revitalize heritage so that the tourist can connect directly with the city's unique character. Likewise, we see that through the scheme, the objective was to develop and document heritage assets of the cities in the country, including natural, culture, living and built heritage. This would form the basis of urban planning, city growth and for providing and delivering services to the citizen. Further, through the scheme, objective was to implement and enhance the basic service delivery with particular focus on the sanitation services like public conveniences, toilets, water taps, street lights with use of latest technologies in improving tourist facilities and amenities. Further, the objective of the scheme was to develop the local capacity, meaning preparing the people, training the stakeholders for the inclusive heritage-based industry. Similarly, further objective of the HRIDAY scheme was to create effective linkages, connections between tourism and cultural facilities in the cities. Likewise, we see that the objective of the scheme involved adaptive rehabilitation of urban heritage and maintenance, including appropriate technologies for historic buildings, retrofitting, as many of the heritage structure were not utilized and were concerned for maintenance. Through the scheme, further objective was to establish and manage effective public-private partnership for adaptive urban rehabilitation. An effective public-private partnership is very important for building and maintain such infrastructure and to address the economic goal in true sense. Likewise, we also see that the ministry through this targeted to develop and promote the core tangible economic activities. These activities would enhance the platform for livelihoods for the stakeholders of the heritage cities. The scheme made provision for necessary skill development and also making the public space accessible and for developing the cultural spaces. Similarly, the ministry through the scheme laid objective to make cities informative and communicative by the use of modern ICT tools, also to use modern surveillances and security apparatus for improving the safety and security. Furthermore, the ministry targeted to increase accessibility to these cities and places by creating roads and addressing universal design, and also provide intellectual access such as digital heritage, GIS mapping of historic location, preparation of tourist maps and routes and so on. Now, looking at the project cost under HRIDAY, the range varied from 22 crores to 89 crores. The total financial outlay was over 453 crores for 12 cities. They designed a mechanism to disburse the funds accordingly. Now, looking at the cities which were taken through the scheme in the mission mode, the scheme included 12 cities across the country. As we can see in the image, Amritsar, which is the center of Sikh, has rich composite culture and secular heritage was covered. We can see Ajmer, which is a hub of rich Indo-Islamic, Royal Rajasthani, Indo-Saracenic and Jain style architecture was covered. Mathura, which is famous for the Krishna Janmabhoomi and Mathura style sculpture arts, was covered in the project. Varanasi, which is known as religious capital of India and also the oldest cities of the world, was covered. We see that Dwarka, which is an ancient kingdom of Lord Krishna and sacred pilgrim site, was covered under the scheme for development. We see Gaya, which is city in Bihar, famous as a Buddhist site, was covered. We also see that Kanchipuram, known as city of 1000 pillars, was covered under the scheme. We also see that Puri, which is famous for its temples, and Jagannath Rath Yatra was also covered under this scheme. Likewise, we see Badami was undertaken for development through the scheme, which is famous for its sandstone rock cut cave temples. We further see that Warangal, famous for its large number of ancient temples, was targeted for development. Similarly, we see that Amravati, a Buddhist center and famous for its largest Buddhist stupa, was developed under the scheme. The 12th city we see is Velankani, famous for the biggest Catholic pilgrimage center constructed in Gothic style, was covered under the scheme. We see that how different communities and different regions in the country were covered for development through this scheme. Now, let us look at the procedure which was followed for the project preparation and implementation. We see a heritage management plan and DPRs were to be developed by National Mission Directorate through empaneled agencies by the ministry for DPR preparation after consultation with all stakeholders. The project were to be selected based on their linkages with the overall heritage development of the city and consideration to their socio-economic impact. The proposals received were ensured for technical and financial feasibility by mission directorates. Selected areas for interventions were ensured to be part of the urban area based on the census of 2011 or by the state government notification, as we had seen in our previous lectures. And we see that this project is a part of the urban planning process. The expected outcomes of the HRIDAY scheme were: first, it focused on attaining improved basic urban infrastructure at existing and emerging tourist, religious and heritage destinations and gateways. Likewise, the improved sanitation standards at natural and cultural tourists attraction with conveniences and safety for visitors were targeted. Further, it was envisaged that proper conservation, revitalization and beautification of heritage monuments would be taken care. With this, also an important greater participation would be encouraged for the local communities in tourism related economic and livelihood activities. Further, the intervention would help in mainstreaming heritage resources with the city systems and city economy. Likewise, the intervention will also lead to improvement in the service level benchmark indicators for urban service delivery, and was also foreseen that the intervention would bring increase in the inflow of the tourists to the cities. Likewise, the intervention in these cities was also anticipated to increase the duration of stay of the tourist in the town, leading to increased economic benefits. Likewise, we see the scheme would result in improvement in the safety of the society and was anticipated to reduce the crime rate in these places of interventions. Now, let us look at the example of Amritsar to understand the ground context and the special purpose plan through city heritage plan. The document is divided in 5 volumes covering detailed procedure, documentation, assessment, proposal and toolkit. Thinking of Amritsar, all of us know the city is a major commercial, cultural and religious center of Sikhism globally. Amritsar is in Punjab and is close to Pakistan border. The project was undertaken by City Anchor Cultural Resource Conservation Initiative CRCI, New Delhi. The City Heritage Plan was prepared to meet the objectives of the mission through intervention in Amritsar. The City Heritage Plan, which we see, is a plan document. In this particular case is covered in 5 volumes, and all these volumes we see addressed to meet the purpose of the mission, how the entire intervention would take place. So, we see that in this particular volume, we see that first they introduced the city, they appraised the heritage and cultural asset of the city, they reviewed the existing initiatives, they undertook stakeholders consultation and undertook projection and infrastructure assessment at the city level, which we are seeing in various lectures, what should be the content of the various plans which we prepare. So, in this image we can see the various volumes, what all they cover. Here we can see volume 1 and volume 2, we can see here volume 3 and 4, and the 5th, which details out the complete detail of the proposed museum which will be designed, which was supposed to be designed in the city. The planning team identified that the urban expansion in Amritsar was pivoted around the walled city, characterized by high density development housing, the city center for commerce, governance and religion, all within a compact area barely like 2 kilometers by 2.5 kilometer, with Sri Harmandir Sahib as the nucleus of all activity impacting growth. Therefore, they identified the urgent need for preparation of city heritage plan to work within a framework that anticipated mounting pressure on the walled city and environment of Sri Harmandir Sahib, and accordingly formulated the design to de-stress this center. The City Heritage Plan of Amritsar strategically addressed the expansion of the city in the context of rings of growth as seen in the image taken from CHP. Proposals for each heritage zones were bound together by an overall city mobility plan in the CHP. The roads radiating out from the center and areas between these intersections identified as critical focus areas for development and management. Proposals for each zones were targeted on development of radiating roads and these filler spaces. They reviewed the project of upgradation of the 21 roads in zone 1, which were all leading to the area of intervention, the walled city, and saw it as an important opportunity for systematic intervention to protect the center from environmental pressure generated by the ill-planned development, which created unimaginable, unmanageable sound pollution and traffic. We see that in the City HRIDAY plan, 5 heritage zones were identified, including Ramdaspur Heritage Zone, Rambagh Garden Recreational Zone, Gobindgarh Fort and Durgyana Temple Historic Areas, Circular Road Historic Connector, 5th Environmental Park. Recommendations were made to enable improved rideability, better services and efficient traffic management so that people could move properly and could really commute the area properly. Each zone became a component in this initiative to improve buffer areas comprising green belts with slow moving traffics and decongested spaces, with activities focused on improvement of quality of life of inhabitants by deviating from the commercial areas. Through better planning and design interventions, these zones were identified as an important initiative in the urban planning scheme to develop a cohesive historic cultural environment, which would contribute to improvement of the quality of life for citizens of Amritsar as per the purpose of the mission. The initiative therefore included expansion of the buffer zone, de-stressing the core area, regeneration of the nodes, creating opportunities for the offshore development. In the process, they reviewed the city from the different aspects such as historical, regional, tourism, economic and environmental aspects. Thereafter, they reviewed the heritage and cultural assets of the city. We see how these processes help the government to attain their purpose overall objectives. We see that they cover appraisal of heritage and cultural assets, which leads to thorough documentation and assessment of the culture and craft in the city and the region. With the systematic understanding of the culture and the place, they adopted the philosophy to further map historic and cultural sites for interventions. As we can see here, the philosophy which they adopted, which was evolving around the fundamental values which people had, the linkages the Amritsar had, and then the 5 R's which were related with the reverence, respect they had, revelation which they discovered the places, resonance, remembrance and reconciliation. In the CHP, the review of existing interventions were also undertaken for larger integration and efficiency of the resources. This allowed interlinking the planning process and also address the problem identified in the review by the ministry, the problem of lack of interconnection, the problem of interventions being taken in isolation. So, we see here how they reviewed the existing initiatives. They reviewed the existing initiatives which involved review of master plan, CDP, zonal plans, regional plan. They reviewed the existing acts and policies of central and state governments applicable to the city. They reviewed the organizational structure. They reviewed the existing proposals and ongoing projects in the city. In the snip taken from CHP, we see the heritage zone identifying the master plan. We see that they reviewed and mapped proposed projects related with recreational space development. In the CHP, the comprehensive mobility plan was also reviewed. They reviewed the administrative structure of ULBs in the state. So many such reviews were made. They also reviewed other schemes including Prasad, Adarsh Samrak Yojana, Amrut, which were the aligned interventions aligned with the developing the cultural assets of the places. They undertook stakeholders consultation. This process allowed meeting one of the prime objective as we had seen in the mission. We can see the snap for the process given in the CHP. Based on the assessment provided in the volume 1, proposals were created and highlighted in volume 2. It provided prioritization of the assets, infrastructure development plan, created shelves of projects like how it will be really taken care of during the execution of the project. They created investment plan and sources of funding. They also worked out with the implementation plan and sources of funding. Further, they worked on how the entire thing would be promoted, the promotion program and marketing strategies, and strategies for operations and maintenance were also designed in this particular CHP. So, you can see all the areas how they have identified the prioritization of assets, how they are working on this civic infrastructure development, shelf of projects, investment plan and sources of funding, implementation plan, promotion and program and strategies for operation and maintenance. So, you can see how all these systematically all the problems have been addressed at the same time they have been integrated. Through this we see that how the process adopted in the preparation of CHP met the objectives of the mission like preservation and revitalization of the heritage, develop and document the heritage, develop the core economic activities, develop the infrastructure in the area. In the project, 5 types of infrastructure projects were planned, including physical infrastructure, utility infrastructure, social infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, economic infrastructure to act as a driver of growth. Further, concentric ring principle was followed to provide the infrastructure, like we can see in the right hand side of the diagram, that the infrastructure provision not only focused within the heritage site, but also to the setting of the site, the further to develop linkages between the individual sites, and then to de-stress the current sites and to service the needs and demands of the heritage site by creating offshore infrastructure. In the image from the proposal from the CHP, you can see the creation of vehicular restricted area around the Golden Temple on the left hand side diagram. On the right hand side map, you can see how the proposal is prepared for one-way loop movement. In the image, you can see on the right top the friction between the motorized and non-motorized traffic. On the right bottom picture, you can see how proposal was made for segregation of traffic and provision of hawkers. On the left hand side, the top image, you can see the narrow street, internal street, and the sections of the outer circular road containing the mixed traffic, how these interventions were taken. On the left hand side, the lower image, you can see proposed internal road and outer circular road with segregated traffic to solve all these kind of problems which you have been experiencing, which the ministry also observed in the process. So you can see how through the detail designing and intervention these things have been changed here. Further, we see there was also provision created for monitoring the progress of the project. For the purpose of monitoring, the ministry periodically monitored the scheme through designated officers. NPMU developed the monitoring framework and tools to assist Mission Directorate for effective monitoring of the interventions undertaken under the project. Third-party monitoring mechanism was employed by National Mission Directorate to keep track of the progress of the project. The expenditure for monitoring purpose was met from the capacity building funds in the Ministry of Professional Services. So, summarizing, we would see that we had today learnt about the government scheme HRIDAY, which was undertaken on a mission mode, particularly to improve the heritage cities in our country, and 12 cities were identified. So, we looked at why what about the scheme, we looked at why it was needed, we looked at what were the key objectives, and we also looked at the procedure which was there. And with the help of the case study, we also saw that how the special purpose plan document is prepared and how it looks like, and what kind of interventions were really done on ground to meet the overall objective of the scheme. So, through this special purpose plan, we see how we address to the specific needs which we want to really want to handle. So, we see that such kind of special purpose plans are created to address to specific needs. Here we see this HRIDAY is addressing to the specific need of culture and heritage development, specifically in the urban areas. So, that was the coverage for today. These were the references which were used. Our coverage was limited with the scope to make you aware of the topic. There are enormous readings and movies available to explore. Few are suggested here. This is not an extensive list. You may feel free to suggest more from your experience. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about your concerns you have. Do share your opinion, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring cities and urban planning. Thank you so much.